Okay, looks like we have everybody in, so welcome to this 50-second webinar on a treatise on cosmic fire. This webinar series is available on makara.us under the subheadings Moria Federation webinars, then webinar series in progress. Just click on these live links and they will get you into the webinar. All episodes of this, the Secret Teachings of All Ages, and the Secret Doctrine series are also available on YouTube. Just do a search for Francis Donald and the webinar you wish to view. You may join any of these webinars on the homepage of Moria Federation. Up in the upper left-hand corner, you will find this listing of currently active webinars series. Okay, so last month we continued with the subsection entitled The Centers and the Senses, Normal and Supernormal. We began our last session with the study of the sense of touch, about which DK says, touch is the faculty which enables us to arrive at the essence by due recognition of the veiling sheath. So after eons, touching, which includes psychometry on the astral plane and planetary psychometry on the mental plane, allows us to familiarize ourselves with the physical, astral, and mental sheaths to the point that we can begin to penetrate the illusion that those sheaths represent, at which point, quote, touch enables the thinker who fully utilizes it to put himself en rapport with the essence of all selves at all stages, and thereby to aid in the due evolution of the sheath and actively to serve. So this gets up into the higher regions of touch, where touch is healing, aids in the evolution of the sheaths, not only by physical plane healing, but also, for example, by weakening the hold of regressive thought forms, or by dissipating an astral glamour that is holding the aspirant back, which DK describes as correcting the inadequacies of the not self, and thus actively serving the plan of evolution, a method particularly suited to those who become lords of compassion, though we're told in esoteric healing that all initiates of the ageless wisdom are necessarily healers, though all may not heal the physical body. In fact, healing the physical body might be much less important in terms of removing the blocks needed to evolve. We next learned that in touch lies the whole secret of the objective solar system, because it is through touch that a quickening of vibration is brought about, which is the purpose of this solar system, this gradual evolutionary quickening of the vibratory quality. DK next contrasts the qualities of the not-self with the qualities of the self, which are gained through higher applications of the sense of touch, and which leads through meditation to contact with the causal body and matter of the Buddhic plane. This happens because, quote, the latent fire of matter attracts to itself that fire latent in other forms. They touch, and recognition and awareness ensues. It's a penetrative sense. It allows us to move through the barriers that, the form barriers that keep us separate. You know, hearing allows us to identify that there is another imprisoned jiva, you might say, or a not self out there. But through touch, we actually are able to penetrate those barriers that separate ourselves. We then learned that touch and the law of attraction are the animating forces behind the raising and merging of the Kundalini fires. So all of that fiery activity that takes place through the surging upward of the Kundalini fires is a function of the sense of touch. It's kind of an extraordinary idea, because what's really going on is that the soul is touching us, and our response comes through this raising of the Kundalini fires. Next, we turn to DK's description of the sense of sight, which he tells us is, quote, the paramount correlating sense of the solar system. Emphasis on correlating. Because of this, it is the sense most connected to the mind and its ability to correlate and synthesize. This is why we say, oh, I see, when you gain some mental apprehension of what's going on. Next, DK gives a summary paragraph in which he states, the work of evolution is to recognize, utilize, coordinate, and dominate the whole, till the self, capital S, by means of these three, meaning the three senses, becomes actively aware of every form, of every vibration, and of every pulsation of the not self. Then, through the arranging power of mind, the objective of the self will be to find the truth. And this time the self is with a small s, or that center in the circle of manifestation, which is, for the capital S self, the center of equilibrium, and the one point where the coordination is perfected. Then the self can dissociate itself from every veil, every contact, and every sense. I read it in full because I think it's a key paragraph that sums up the purpose of the senses. Then this takes us up to where we left off last time. So any thoughts or questions thus far? As I say every time, it's always more interesting to have dialogue, whether through questions and comments, just try to keep it relevant to what we're talking about, than it is for me to just drone on, with a monologue. Yes, Barbara, hello.
As you were speaking, I was considering the connection of touch and sight with regard to the veils and the portals, that it may be that sight identifies the portal, but it is the touch and perhaps will going through the touch that opens the door of the portal or unveils. So I wonder if in some ways the will of Atma is significant for this aspect of evolution.
Yes, the will of Atma would be more oriented towards sight, because will and sight are both synthetic. So one way that it unfolds is through touch. We follow what is initially an instinct to penetrate the veil between the self and the not self, to find, you could say, the other. Through sight, we are able to synthesize that which we are able to penetrate. In other words, to comprehend, to understand, to gain a full picture of that which we have contacted, right? So it's, you can look at the three together as hearing allows us to locate the other or the not self. Then touch allows us to begin the process of penetrating into the other. DK earlier tells us that, through hearing, we discover the self, the indweller. Through touch, we discover the our brother, and then through sight, we discover the group. That's another progression that allows us to have a sense of how these senses are interrelated. We have to also remember that the senses are all, let's see, how do I say this? They're intermingled with, at every level that you go up, they become more and more interrelated. And so they inform each other, right? I mean, that's even true on the physical plane. You can hardly, for instance, separate the sense of smell and taste. For instance, at a meal, you're as much using the sense of smell as you are the sense of taste. So there's a lot of, but as you progress up through the planes, through the sheaths, I should say, the senses become more interdependent and interactive. Okay, Georgina?
Francis, you mentioned the word see, that exclamation, oh, I see, sometimes when somebody
Correct.
points something out. But I just wondered, for me anyway, when I say I see, sometimes it's an intuitive see. I don't quite know why I do, but I just know. Could that be a sort of a relevant reference point? The word I see, it's an intuitive idea or concept which one understands.
Yeah, see, here's where these senses begin to intermingle. In the intuition is actually a function of the sense of taste, but the sense of taste, which is an ability to discern quality, specific quality, is gained through all the senses. So, yeah, you can drive yourself crazy trying to find out the source sense for your experience, especially when you move into the higher sheaths, because they're all involved in some way. Okay, yeah, sure. There was another hand up. Who was that? Let's see here. Let me pull up the participants. I saw another hand, you guys. You must have lowered it. Yeah, Maria Christina.
It was my hand. I would just, for me, would interject. I have a hard time as sight being the sense of synthesis. I see the greatest light being a secondary, so I struggle to identify that because there's a sense of duality between me and what I see and the scene. And it's just a little struggle for me, and I'm throwing it on the table.
Yeah, well, certainly physical plane sight is dualistic. But if you think about how, even with, in spite of that duality, say on the physical plane when you're looking at something, you know, um, like, the classic is the idea of an elephant. So, if you you can hear an elephant's roar, right? Or trumpeting, and you have the ability to locate where that that being who is the source of this sound is. So it's as you approach it, then you're approaching it in order to implement the sense of touch, that is to say,
Yes.
contact, right?
Yes.
But you could touch an elephant. You would have to have you would have to touch it for some time before you would have the same experience as one quick sight of the elephant, because then you would gain a sense of its proportion, its size, its texture, all aspects of it. In other words, you would have a synthetic understanding
Or
of
mental. That
yeah,
would be very mental. And
that's right.
touch seems a lot more, even if you're touching the tail or the trunk, as they say, but
Right.
somehow a greater sense of the presence of it.
Mm.
And I'm just, this is just my own little
Yeah, well, no,
thing
it's
I struggle with for long. My
well,
latest light.
until you get to Buddhic levels, you are separate. All the senses are used to identify the not self as opposed to the imprisoned self, right? It's only at Buddhic levels that the
Yes.
essence within is identified through the sense.
Oh, there you go. Thank you. That opens up a whole, thank you.
Yeah, good. All right, anyone else? Okay.
Hey, Francis, can you hear me now?
Yay!
All right, cool.
Good. What was it?
Well, I was on my phone and then I was on another meeting, and so it somehow canceled out my ability to use my mic.
Okay, good. All right. Let's see. I just looking through the chats here. Okay, Magda is
Yeah,
just listening today, so she won't be commenting. She often offers very good comments. Sam is here. April. Okay, good.
yeah. Just to cover something real quick with Janet. Janet, are you able to click the view icon and swap the video? Do you see on the top of the Zoom where it says meeting and Francis Donald's screen?
I see meeting Francis, and then it's recording, and 20
If you
minutes
click
we've
on
been
the
on.
Francis, do you see Francis Donald's screen? If you click on that, does
Right.
it go to his screen?
No. Oh, yes. Now it is.
Okay.
Thank you so
Yep, no
much.
problem.
But
Yeah, we tend to forget Michael's also a Zoom expert. So if you have any deep Zoom questions, he's a good source for answers. Okay, so now we get into this session's material. So let's start with the reader, please.
Yeah, and Veronica.
Hello. This leads in. Oh, I can't see. I'm seeing Zoom. Oh, okay. It came back. Can you hear me?
Sorry about that. Yes, we hear you. Welcome. Thank you.
Okay. This leads in every manifestation to three types of separation. Involution, the separation of matter or the one becoming the many. The senses are developed and the apparatus is perfected by the self for the utilization of matter. This is under the law of economy. Evolution, up to the time of the probationary path, the merging of spirit and matter, and the utilization of the senses in a progressing identification of the self with all forms from the lowest to those relatively refined. This is under the law of attraction. Evolution on the path. Again, the separation of spirit from matter, its identification with the One, and the ultimate rejection of form. The senses then are synthesized into a quiet faculty, and the self has no further use for the not-self. It blends with the all-self. This is under the law of synthesis.
Thank you, Aunt Veronica. All right. First, this leads in every manifestation to three types of separation. Note that separation is inherent to manifestation. No matter at what level you are, there is some form of separation. But as one progresses, the quality of the separation falls under the three major laws, right? First being involution, the separation of matter, or the one becoming the many. The senses are developed and the apparatus is perfected by the self for the utilization of matter. This is under the law of economy. So during involution, the purpose of deity is that the one will become the many, in order that the lesser lives may be lifted up. The little lives that make up the matter aspect may be lifted through their participation in the form aspect of the greater lives. Development of the senses opens the windows of the prison house of the informed, imprisoned jiva onto the not-self, opens up the windows onto the not-self, which includes the one's environment as well as other imprisoned jivas. The law of economy governs the scattering of the atoms of matter, their dissociation from one another, their wide distribution, vibratory rhythm, heterogeneity, and inherent rotary action. All the focus through the law of economy goes outward to the not-self. The five senses are specially designed to allow the indweller to sequentially first recognize, then utilize, then coordinate, and finally dominate that which the law of economy governs. Involution animates the Brahma aspect, or what in this chart is called the first life wave. The particular sense involved at this stage is hearing, for the creator works through sound. Any thoughts or questions? Okay. Next, we have evolution up to the point of the probationary path. The merging of spirit and matter and the utilization of the senses in a progressing identification of the self with all forms, from the lowest to the relatively refined. This is under the law of attraction. Okay, the law of attraction, which governs evolution up to the time of the probationary path, reverses the outward or downward motion of the involutionary arc and shifts the focus of the indweller from the utilization of matter to identification with a progressive series of increasingly refined forms. By identifying with forms of higher and higher vibratory quality through the law of attraction, sorry, I had a little problem there. The indweller gradually merges spirit and matter. So through utilization of of the law of attraction, the indweller gradually merges spirit and matter. This is not yet identification with the self, capital S, or with a life within the forms, but rather with a series of ever more refined forms. This stage is an expression of the Vishnu aspect, or what this chart describes as the second life wave. The sense here involved is touch, that penetrative sense, the primary means by which the indweller relates to the not self, to the form aspect. Okay? Third stage, evolution on the path. Again, the separation of the spirit from matter is its identification with the one and the ultimate rejection of form. The senses then are synthesized into acquired faculty, and the self has no further use for the not self. It blends with the all self. This is under the law of synthesis. So at this stage, the indweller shifts from identification with a progressive series of ever more refined forms, that was the stage of evolution, to identification, that's the key word, with the one life that permeates all forms. When this stage is reached, the senses are no longer oriented towards the outer world, towards manifestation, but are now, under the law of the same name, synthesized into a unified mental faculty characterized by direct knowing, which reveals the inner realms. This direct knowing reveals the inner realms. This is an expression of the Shiva aspect, or what this chart calls the third life wave. In order to gain access to the Shiva aspect, you have to build the Antakarana. The sense involved is the synthetic sense of sight, which allows for realization of the threefold expression of deity. Michael Robbins here gives some astrological insights on this highest stage. Could we get a reader, please?
Gordon, do you want to read?
When the self begins to blend with the all self, Mercury and the sun have become one. From a very important perspective, Mercury, the planet of mediation, is the significator of the senses. When Mercury symbolically blends with the sun, symbol of synthesized knowledge and faculty, the senses, at least in relation to the 18 lower subplanes, are no longer needed.
Thoughts or questions about this? You know, Mercury and the sun are always there, right? But one's experience of them changes according to the level of their evolution. When one is especially sensitized to Mercury, who is called the messenger of the gods because it allows a link, a relating of the higher to the lower, then one is fully engaged with the senses, right? When one moves into this third stage, described here, let me get this, right, of evolution, where identification with the one becomes the dominant experience and the rejection of the form ensues, then one's sensitivity to Mercury is superseded by an identification with the actual source of Mercury, which is the sun. And this phenomena is called Mercury and the sun are one, right? Okay. All right, next up, can we get a reader, please? Yes, Barbara.
Um, so as you describe the light wave, the life wave, in 3 forms, it sounded like one is involved in involution, the next is involved in the transition, and the third then is involved in evolution. So are these different forces? Do they have different properties? And is evolution, does it have then a attractive pull from Mercury and the sun?
Yeah, okay. Yes, they have different sources. You can see up here that they are the emanations of the 3 logoi. The third logoi, which is concerned with articulating the manifested realm, uses the first life wave in order to plunge the indwelling jiva into the material realm. Right. That's all aspects of the third aspect, the material aspect, and it was the dominant theme of the previous solar system. Actually, I should have these. I should show you these this way. Yeah. So that's this one connected with the Brahma. You can see names for this here: Holy Ghost, Cheat, Brahma, third logos, creative wisdom, intelligence. All of these come about, you could say, through this involution of the first life wave. Now, interestingly, it's called here evolution of matter because, in fact, you could look at all 3 as a stage of evolution because this first life wave has to take place before the second life wave can be effective. And therefore you can look at it as evolution, but it's you could say, an involutional stage of the overall evolution. Okay. And it's the whole purpose of this, which is represented by the first 2.5 root races, is just to gain a physical hold, just to move into the outer form so that it can become expressive of the indwelling jiva, right? And that's done through this second stage, right, which is initiated by the second logos and takes one all the way up through development, as he says, through the probation or the level of probation, which takes one up through to the 4th subplane of the mental plane. So all that development has to do with recognition of ever increasing higher forms, ever more refined forms. It's a process of discarding through the law of repulsion those forms that are no longer useful and taking on those forms which are more expressive of the gains made by the indwelling consciousness. And then finally you have this what's called here the first life wave because it comes from the first logos. Third, sequentially, right, the Shiva aspect, which discards form altogether. This is, at this point, all the gains that can be made by an interaction with the not self have been made. And one then progresses into identification with the spirit aspect. Okay, Barbara, does that answer your question?
It's very, very helpful. I just have one follow-up question. Plotinus said that you can evolve with the crowd and be carried by the life wave. But at a certain point, you need to find an eros, an attractive form that will take you into the next stage of evolution, the third wave. But I see that bliss and love are part of the second life wave. So it perhaps his eros relates to a certain phase of the second life wave, and then there may be another force that comes in.
Yeah, well, it relates to that idea of eros. Eros has been trivialized, you know, a little cherub with a bow and arrow, right? Which is more relates popularly to desire than to love. But in truth, it represents the transition from the astral to the Buddhic plane. You know, you begin to respond to eros, which is that truer form that is represented by this link between the astral and Buddhic. And esoterically, eros is an essential aspect for becoming a lord of compassion. You know, you in a sense align with this energy of eros in order to do so. Nadell.
Would it be accurate to say that as the life wave is coming down, like you got the first and the second waves, that it's the consciousness aspect passing through the Deva evolution and then coming part way up, and then the third coming down is the spirit aspect merging with the sort of consciousness that's coming up?
Yeah, this evolution of matter is completely utilizes the Deva kingdom, right? This is the masters who manipulate this descent into matter are, you could say, in league with the great Deva lords in order to do this, and they. You know, it's the ability to master Devic hearing that allows a master to create at this level, or, you know, whatever that master may be. It might be a high dhyani beyond, you know, at a logoic level that initiates this will to be, you know. So very much involved in Deva. In fact, nothing can take place without without being in league with the Devic forces, right, at all levels, including the elementals, which are represented here, the three elemental kingdoms, you know, which actually are able to drive matter into these lowest subplanes, right? Also involved here is Fohat, which binds spirit to matter, right?
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, hope that answered. We didn't get to all three, but that's, you know, Davids are involved at all levels, but that initial level through sound is pure Deva in its orientation, right? Okay, anyone else? Good. I love this, you know, good discussion, good ideas coming forth. Okay, can we get a reader, please?
Janet?
If this is born in mind, it leads to a realization that the separation of the spirit from the material vehicle involves two aspects of the one great all. Herein is seen the work of the Creator, the Preserver, and the Destroyer. In the final perfection of this third sense of sight, the term used is wholly inadequate one of realization. Let the student study carefully the lowest and the highest demonstration of the senses, as laid down in the tabulation earlier imparted, and note the occult significance of the expressions used in the summation.
Thank you, Janet. All right. So first up, if this is borne in mind, if what is borne in mind, let's go back and find out what needs to be borne in mind here. Hang on a sec. Yeah, okay. The three stages of involution, evolution, and evolution on the path. So, and the qualities given in those. So that's what I believe if this is borne in mind relates to. Okay, so so if this is borne in mind, it leads to a realization that the separation of the spirit from the material vehicle involves two aspects of the one great all. Herein is seen the work of the creator, the preserver, and the destroyer. Okay, so I had to spend a little bit of time on this. Separation involves both the third and the first aspects of divinity, the creator and the destroyer. For it is deity that the first aspect that initiates the will to be, which is then implemented by Brahma. The second, or Vishnu aspect, represents the means by which the third aspect is drawn back up into the first aspect. That's the evolutionary quality, which is ruled by Vishnu. And this is called in the Bible the return of the prodigal son. So even though you have these two aspects of the one great all, they're implemented by the three aspects of that creator. Next, in the final perfection of this third sense of sight, the term used is the wholly inadequate one of realization. So realization, you see here, is the sense of sight on the atmic plane. DK gives us no additional information on this highest demonstration of the sense of sight, but we might infer from the term realization that at this level, sight penetrates and reveals the means by which the life aspect permeates all creation. For then we'll be able to see the phohatic vibratory field that binds spirit and matter, that binds the spirit to their particular forms. And through that seeing comes a realization of the whole, of the indweller and the form which that indweller inhabits. Next, let the student study carefully the lowest and highest demonstrations of the senses as laid down in the tabulation earlier imparted. And note the occult significance of the expressions used in the summation. So this is an introductory statement for the tabulation, which follows. You see it here on the actual page. I put it into a chart form here. Yeah, so could we get a reader for this, please? You want to read, just read horizontally right down the line.
Joe, you want to read?
You would. I just signed on. Hearing, beatitude. This is realized through the not self. Touch, service, the summation of the work of the self for the not self. Sight, realization, recognition of the triplicity needed in manifestation or the reflex action of the self and the not self. Taste, perfection, evolution completed through the utilization of the not self and its realized adequacy. Smell, perfected knowledge, the principle of manas in its discriminating knowledge activity, perfecting the interrelation between the self and the not-self. This all concerns the perfected, realized personality.
Okay, thanks, Joe. Okay, first up, the first column lists the physical senses. The second column lists the atmic senses, which are the highest given by DK. And the third column describes how a particular sense is used to relate the self to the not self. So first, we have hearing, which culminates as beatitude and is the only sense developed and realized completely through the not self. Why? Because it is governed by involution, the one becoming the many, and thus by the law of economy. Hearing, uniquely among the senses, orients us outwards, and is thus the means par excellence by which we recognize, utilize, coordinate, and finally dominate the not self. This final dominance, which results in beatitude, comes about through the realization that all aspects of the not self, all its parts, together constitute the form aspect of deity. Or as DK says, beatitude always follows upon realization of the unity of the part with the whole. Next, touch, service. He also calls this active service. The summation of the work of the self for the not self. So touch, the sense most expressive of this second solar system, or in this second solar system, is thus the first of the senses to express itself through evolution and the law of attraction. DK defines the service aspect of touch entirely in terms of the work done by the soul in its effort to draw the personality up into its realm of consciousness. This is done through Kundalini fire, which we are told employs the sense of touch to blend the lesser fires with the greater until soul infusion is achieved. It is also touch as psychometry that relates individual group members to the whole, thus allowing for an expression of group consciousness. Any thoughts or questions about either of these ideas? I mean, that when I read this last thing, that the sense of touch is actually the means by which we are able to gain group consciousness. So it becomes incredibly important to the Aquarian orientation. You could say that in the sign Aquarius, we are really beginning to realize, to demonstrate the goals of this second solar system. And next, sight, realization. Recognition of the triplicity needed in manifestation, or the reflex action of the self and the not self. So sight as realization allows for an inner penetration into the depths of being, resulting in a synthetic realization of the one expressing itself as three, of the unified purpose that is expressed through the three aspects of divinity. This is fitting, as sight is the third sense, developmentally considered. Reflex action is automatic and instantaneous, suggesting absolute integration between the self and not self, the indweller and the she's he or she inhabits. Let's take a look at MDR's thoughts on this sense of realization. Can we get a reader, please?
Houston.
Through realization, the Trinity is seen as the modus operandi of oneness. We might say that it has much to do with the ability to see consciousness as the necessary middle factor between spirit and matter. Realization will be related to light, to Venus, to second ray and the fifth ray. We might call it the registration of the connecting light. There is a recognition of light and of the interactivity between spirit and matter, which proceeds because of the existence of the light. The third and fifth rays are involved.
Thank you. Any thoughts or questions about this? I love Michael's astrological insights. It shows what a really a profound astrologer he was to see these connections. Okay, next, taste. Yes, Maria Christina. Maria Christina?
I was talking and I was muted. I just have to say, I've been having a lot of realizations as we go through, and this last commentary of Michael's, as we got into of course, the Trinity. From one, you immediately goes to the one, as we are familiar, and that middle factor realization is related to the light, the registration of the connecting light. Anyway, it's been very fulfilling what we've been reading. Thank you.
Good. Yeah, he brings in this idea that, light is a substance that allows connection between spirit and matter. Soul is light and light is the soul. That idea, that second aspect, which relates the above to the below, right? And he brings that out beautifully here. Okay, so next up we have taste, whose highest expression is perfection. Evolution completed through the utilization of the not-self and its realized adequacy. So earlier DK tells us that taste and smell are auxiliary senses to the sense of touch. Hence, like touch, taste as perfection is used by the self to perfect the lower vehicles. Taste on the Buddhic plane demonstrates as intuition, that quality of direct knowing that fuses the self with the not self. It's interesting to note that a realized adequacy of the not self results in perfection. All that can be gained through interrelation with the not self has been achieved. And DK calls that state or that stage realized adequacy, right? And which results in perfection. Taste is the fourth sense and is thus related to the fourth ray, one of whose attributes is to seek perfection through harmony. And so this term, harmony and realized adequacy and perfection, are all interrelated. Very Libran in a lot of ways, this idea of you gain this place of equanimity, of balance between the self and the not self through a realized adequacy of the not self. Next, smell, perfected knowledge. The principle of manas in its discriminating knowledge activity, perfecting the interrelation between the self and the not self. So the sense of smell on the Atmic plane represents another aspect of perfection, here focusing on perfected knowledge. Again, we see the importance. Michael, can you take care of that? Michael?
Yeah, it was Maria. She just wasn't muted. It's good now.
Thanks. Okay. Let's see, where was it? All right, so before you had perfection, here you have perfected knowledge. Again, we see the importance of number, where this fifth sense is the means of perfecting the fifth principle, manas. Through the utilization of Atmic mind, which is related to the third ray, the triadal self and the not self are brought into an ideal interrelation. The essence of self is sensed, then known through perfected knowledge. And that essence then stands in a perfected relationship with its instrument of expression. See how similar these are, right? They're like, you know, five facets of a unified synthetic expression. And finally, this all concerns the perfected, realized personality. Now, personality at the stage where the atmic senses can be utilized is actually the vehicle for a fourth or fifth initiate. And yet it's a relevant comment because the vehicle is at this stage truly and fully perfected, even though it's way beyond what we normally think of as personality expression. Yes, Joe.
It occurs to me that we, in our lower selves, if you will, can attain to hearing, touch, and sight. And that we're really dealing there with the soul. But I'm also wondering if taste and smell might show they work from the third to the and into the fourth level, and monadic. Certainly Otmic, I think, as well.
Well, I think all five are relevant to monadic realization at this high stage, you know, of atmic demonstration, right? There is a progressive quality up through the senses because they relate to the five planes, right? But you also have to remember that as they, and you know, I think this even relates to the subplanes. You know, I think, for instance, that hearing, as it demonstrates through Atma, is found on the lowest subplane of the Atmic plane, right? So both are in place. It relates to the physical plane, but it also relates to the lowest subplane of each plane, and the same thing is true with each of these senses. So, but there's such a melding as you move into these higher demonstrations of the senses that I don't think you can categorize and say, well, it's through taste and smell that you come into monadic realization, because I think, you know, the fifth initiate who's attempting to become a Chohan, which is when the monadic plane is fully realized, will be utilizing all these senses in order to do so. Yes, Tom.
Yeah, I also see a kind of progression. I'm not sure if I see right, but if we think about the perfection and perfect knowledge, to me it seems that the perfect knowledge is more evolved stage in that way, that in perfection, when you're under the fourth ray, you are kind of having this biting thing where you have the crisis and then harmony. But when you have perfect knowledge, you are higher up, you then know what it means and you are ready to move on. So I see that progression that way.
Yeah, you can see it as having reached at the level of taste, having reached a stage of balance, then you're ready to proceed into the next stage, which comes whose demonstration is perfected knowledge. So you gain this quality of, what he calls, where is that? Where he calls an adequate, realized adequacy at the stage of taste, which is a balance, a stage of balance, which is a very Libran in that sense. That allows, just like when one reverses oneself on the wheel, one then moves into a positive progression. And, you could make the case that that next stage of becoming would be represented by perfected knowledge.
Then you know what you need to know, and you don't want to know it anymore. You want to know more.
Well, you could say that by the term perfected, that the whole realm of knowledge has been attained, has been achieved, and that you are now ready to move into something more synthetic, which we can't even imagine. I mean, we can, it's very difficult for us to even imagine the intuition, which is direct knowing. But perfected knowledge suggests, all aspects of the cosmic physical plane are then known. All forms of its energies, its interrelations, are, you could say, known and mastered at this level.
Yeah, you are done with it then.
You're down, yeah, and you can then, and then you can move on. Yes, Om Swaha.
It's actually Ariane. Hello again.
Oh, hi, Ariane.
It's my private account. Yeah, I'm coming very late into this dialogue, so I apologize if this seems obvious to everyone else. But I just want to comment because I'm really swimming and struggling to understand, not only because I don't have the evolutionary attainment to understand these ideas, but even literally to understand what you are presenting here. It's so new and so vast. But it seems like this incredible chart, which, on and someone, I don't know if it was Michael, was talking about Chohan and light, and you were talking about Eros and how we normally think about the little cherubim. It seems like the senses, when they're associated to the body, they're on the left column here. Mm-hmm. And when we go into a body of light, like a master of wisdom, then what we take as the senses no longer applies. But I always thought, why would a body of light still have senses? But here what you're saying is that even though we're using these words, the same words like hearing, it's not really like we understand it when we're thinking about it from our present state, because we're so identified with our body.
That's exactly right.
And then the second thing is that this idea about desire and how, like in Christianity, we've been, and even when we think about the masters having, and I just want you to correct me if I'm wrong, that's why I'm saying this stuff, that the masters of wisdom who've attained the capacity to master their body, their emotions and mind, that we think sometimes or often that the senses are only associated with desire and that we have to rule them and rein them in. We know that the greatest artists, like, a Rembrandt or a Leonardo da Vinci, that to attain true art, one has to sacrifice and restrain through skillfulness and through the denial of, like, ordinary self-expression, which I would say is related to the expression of negativity. How often many very personalized artists do, they're just venting or trying to understand something. But that's very different, using art as a medium to understand something than to create something that's objective, universally understood, and that goes beyond even the senses. And I think that's part of the reason why it's very hard to understand this subject, because I think we're really struggling to be in right relationship to our senses, and we don't even know what that means. So I leave that there. I don't know if you understand what my confusion is, but that's what I'm asking about.
Yeah, it's a confusion we all share, which is the ability to identify with the higher forms of these senses, right? I mean, you know, we could go all the way back to the list, which appears on page 188 of TCF, if you want to pull it up, and it lists, you know, all 5 levels of each sense, and you know, but we'll just take one that is, I think, particularly relevant, which is the sense of taste, curiously enough, because it expresses itself as imagination on the astral plane. Now, that's just one plane removed in one sense. You know, we have 5 senses here with a range of 5 planes, but let's just take that one, you know, where you have the sense of taste expressing itself as imagination. Now, you know, just I think all of us could participate in this exercise. Just try to imagine what that connection is. You know, so you know, you taste something like food, right? And the sensation that it invokes is what we identify as the sense of taste, right? Mind has to be present for one to actually experience taste, right? Because and you can pretty quickly see how the imagination comes in, because that's, in a sense, what identifies the quality of taste that you're having an experience of. You see, so if you ponder these, you can start to sense the link between you know, a sense on one plane and the sense on the next. It's not necessarily easy to do, and it's not immediate by any you know at all. But if you take the time, you know, after you get a sense of how those two might be related, then you know, work with how imagination and discrimination are related, right? Yes, Ariane.
Yeah, just to follow up on that. That is so deep because, you know, I was in a 4th way school for actually decades, and before now, and I left over a decade ago. But basically, the teacher would always say that the main obstacles were identification and imagination.
Yeah.
And imagination is where we live every moment and every day of our life, because we're not here for our life. We not only do not show up for our life because we have a host of problems and issues and hurts, and imagination relates to our past, even our past interpretations. But it's the ordinary state, the foggy, sleepy state that we live in. And then it's punctuated by the identification in the emotional realm, the astral realm, when we become, you know, triggered by something emotionally or identified. We think that's mine, or that's my career, that's who I am, whatever the ideas are. And we feel either threatened or we feel overly involved or whatever it is. Even when we want to have something done at a high standard, like we want to bring all of ourselves to it and elevate, like even the political situation that we are faced with now in America. So the fact that that taste is there, and we can see how the media and social media is using this, you know, to destroy both the mind and political engagement, because people are just constantly thinking about what they might get, what they might have, and also imagining that how they engage in social media is a full experience and giving them a sense that very stimulating experience, but the sense that they've had it, but it's just a virtual experience. It's not a complete experience, and it's certainly not an awakened experience. So
No,
I don't even know where to go with that.
well, it's a progressive awakening. First of all, you have to realize that all of it belongs to what DK calls the environment, right? Which is the not self. And through detachment from identification with any element of this environment, we're able to better respond to the soul, right? And in that response, we evolve. And of course, this is a very, very, very long path. We've all been at this for millions of years. You know, those who individualized on this globe did so about 21 million years ago, and we're still at it. We're still swimming in this soup of Maya, glamour, and illusion. Everything in our environment is some shade of that, you know. So through decentralizing, that is getting to seeing a perspective beyond the separated self, and seeing all aspects of the world stage, you could say. You know, that world stage extends into your own living room, right? As functions of the not self, we can begin, you know. I mean, DK is throwing us a rope here, you know, through understanding. You know, this is like this rope goes into the ocean of illusion all the way down to where we are. And if you want, you can grab this rope and use it to help yourself evolve, knowing that it's not going to be instant, but at least if you make the effort, some evolution can take place. Thank you, Ariane. Okay. Okay, let's see here. Okay, I'm going to go to Nadell. Yes, Nadell?
Just that, in sort of in response to Ariane, I remember Michael saying this book is written for initiates of the third degree. So, you know, a lot of it is going to be difficult to understand. Just the effort to try and understand is of itself of great value.
Yes, indeed. You respond, you know, to your own upward parabola, you know, and that is a lifeline extended to you by your soul. And yes, we're all headed towards that third degree, which is a tremendous emancipation, happens at that level, you know, is completed at the fourth degree, right? But, you know, you can pull your sights down one plane to the second degree, where you finally gain control over the astral plane. This is a huge thing where astrality no longer, it's not that it's not felt, it's that it doesn't determine your life process and life progress. That's huge. You know, I'd be glad to settle, you know, for that stage, because then you could start relating to the illusions of the mental plane, which is the work done between the second and third initiation. Thank you, Nadell. Anyone else? Okay. Right. Okay, next up, can we get a reader, please? This short passage. Sometimes I put in these short passages just to get to the bottom of the page, you know. So that's the case here. Reader, please.
Magda, do you want to read? Or did you say she couldn't read today, right?
I think she put something in the chat box about being on or something.
Okay. Maria.
Okay. In all these perfections is seen the awareness of the self.
and the graded process of identification, utilization, manipulation, and final rejection of the not-self by that self who is now consciously aware. He hears the note of nature and that of his monads. He recognizes their identity, utilizes their vibration, and passes rapidly through the three stages of creator, preserver, and destroyer.
Thank you, Maria. So first, in all these perfections is seen the awareness of the self and the graded process of identification, utilization, manipulation, and final rejection of the not self by that self who is now consciously aware. So all these perfections represents the five senses demonstrating on the atmic plane. So awareness of the self gradually unfolds, first through one's relationship with the not self, beginning with identification with the not self, then progressing to utilization and manipulation of the not self, right? At first it's completely passive, but then you learn how to use the not self, right? And in some ways, this embeds you more deeply into identification with the not self. And finally, a way later stage, complete rejection of the not self as one's source of being, not through utility, because a master will use the not self in service, but in terms of rejection of the not self as one's source of being, right? They'll finally reject it as a source of self. The not self is still used in service. It's just no longer a part of one's identity. In pop music terms, the material girl finally becomes the Madonna. Okay, next. He hears the note of nature and that of his monad. He recognizes their identity, utilizes their vibration, and passes rapidly through the three stages of creator, preserver, and destroyer. Okay, I'm just noticing here that hearing comes back into the picture. You see, all these senses function on this high plane. This kind of references the dialogue with Joe, who was talking about, how do these senses unfold, in terms of recognition of the monad. Well, here you first, hearing always happens first before the other senses, right? So before you can touch or make contact with the monad, you hear its note. You hear the note of nature and that of the monad. So the note of nature relates to the four elements which rule the lower worlds. The note of the monad relates the initiate to life itself, which indwells all nature. Hearing both notes simultaneously reveals source, effect, and the relation between the two. Thus, through the senses, as they demonstrate on the atmic plane, the initiate, quote, passes rapidly through the three stages of creator, preserver, and destroyer, thus achieving a synthetic recognition and understanding of deity as the one who demonstrates through the three. Okay, yes, Tom.
I was thinking about the senses and the way of progressions. We usually think of them as horizontal way, that we are here and we see and hear the physical things on the same level as we are. But do you think that it will work the same way vertically, upwards? So the first contact for those planes where the jiva is reaching for is kind of hearing, and then you come to those, or is it something just totally different?
Well, I think, the passage we just read indicates that's exactly what happens. That, you know, for instance, a master of wisdom or fourth initiate, you know, who knows, would, well, actually, DK says that you first make contact with with the monad at your third initiation, but this is a brief experience that reorients you entirely. And it's only made possible because you have then become entirely soul infused, right? But then you descend back into the valley, and you lose that monadic contact, right? It comes again at the fourth and fifth initiations, which is what aligns you initially with monadic reality. And it would follow then that the next stage would be, as you suggest, that you begin this process of closing the gap and making actual connection through the sense of touch, right? At a higher stage, you know, called realization on the Atmic plane, you would then see some extraordinary energy configuration that you would synthetically identify as the monad, you know.
Yeah,
So you,
that would explain also the sea and the light, because when you get enlightened, then you are in a way in transforming, using that kind of sense of sight before you understand a little more. So that all makes sense.
yeah, so, you know, you don't leave these senses behind because they're necessary to make the next, to reach the next stage, right? So, you know, once you've heard the still small voice of the soul, that orients you, you know, directionally to that great field of energy, which then you could say um, brings you towards the experience of touching, right? It allows you then to pursue that next stage, which is touching. Well, the same thing takes place at a higher levels with the monad. At every stage, that first sense of hearing is necessary in order to initiate the contact, right? And then you complete contact as you come up through the senses. I'm actually really glad to have this conversation with you guys because it's really making it clear in my mind as well. Okay, Ariane.
Yeah, just make it short. So then what about Nadam? Nadam is the sound one hears. Maybe many people hear that in this room, maybe even now. What do you think the nature of Nadam is? And is it coming from the soul or something higher? And when is it bestowed upon one? Like when does it start to be heard by the aspirant or the initiate? Do you have any thoughts about that? You know what I'm talking about when I say Nadam.
Is it Nadam, Nadam?
Yeah, it's a Sanskrit word. It's this kind of seashell sound that I imagine other people are hearing it right now. Yeah, in your ear. It's not tinnitus. It's of a different quality, and it just seems to happen after a certain time in one's development. I started hearing it in 2000.
Well, I'm fascinated, but I can't really comment because it's a new concept to me. I'm going to look it up as soon as this webinar is over, and then maybe I could address that next time. Yeah, I'm not a Sanskrit expert, but thank you for that. Joe.
First, I'll respond to Om Swaha to say that the sound that she's describing, that in the, Yogananda line, they teach from the very beginning to listen for that sound. So that's just an add-on for what it's worth.
Let me add here before you go on. Probably in theosophy, that would be the voice of the silence, or the still small voice of the soul. I can't say that with authority, but you know, that's very well might be what this nadam is about. Go ahead, Joe.
I think you're right. I would make that association as well. The other thing I wanted to say was with respect to sound, touch, and sight, that the Roman Catholic Church in which I was raised says that a child is not able to receive the communion and be a part of the family of the church until they reach the age of reason, which happens to be 7 with the church. And I think it's as if the church has recognized that those senses don't all come into full play until one is about 7 years old.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the recapitulation also comes through the senses in a kind of abstract way. You know, the infant, for instance, hears before it touches, and certainly touches before it sees. You know, if you ever look into the eyes of a brand new infant, they're not seeing at all like we see. You know, and yet their sense of touch is certainly developed. I mean, because that's the nature of their connection. So we can extend that and say that full faculty in the senses probably comes after those recapitulative stages, right? Okay, and we'll have Ariane one more time, and that'll be it for this session. Yes, Ariane. Or did you just not put your hand down?
Oh, I'll just say thank you so much, Francis, Donald. That's all I'll say. I did not put down my hand, but I thank you for all of us. Thank you.
You're very welcome. You know, I love the dialogue because it allows us to grow together. So I appreciate all of you who are pitching in with comments and questions as well. So thank you.